Hey guys, welcome to Reform Perspective. I'm Josiah Espinoza.
And I am Princess Espinoza.
And today we're going to do a special edition. Today I have my wife on here with me today, and we're going to be talking about the topic of sex. And the reason that we wanted to talk about this was because we feel like in the Christian community, there's a lot of stigma, a lot of maybe miscommunications, misunderstandings about the nature and the extent and the beauty of sex, how God intended sex to be between Christian couples. And so let's just get started. Well, we know that from the very beginning God created man and He created woman. He created male and He created females. We read in Genesis chapter 2 that when God created man, He formed them out of the dust of the field. Now this is what the book of Genesis says in Genesis chapter 2, starting in verse 18. It says, "Then the Lord God said, 'It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him.' Now out of the ground the Lord God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he could call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all livestock, and to the birds of the heavens, and to every beasts of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, He took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man He made into a woman, and brought her to the man. Then the man said, 'This is at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore,'" and I think this is the most important one, "'therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked, and were not ashamed.'" Now, I think a lot of Christians, they tend to take this verse and they say, well, see, men are superior to women, or no, see, that was before the fall and they were supposed to be together, but after the fall God then made man above woman. And it's like, I feel like it misses the whole point of this story. Yes, okay, yeah, I get it that God has a created order, and that men have a different role in women when it comes to the leadership of the family because of this. But I think this is such a beautiful portrayal of what God intended for a man and a woman to be, right? Obviously, Adam was seeing all the animals, he was naming them all, and he realized, hey, there's something missing that I don't have. Every beast of the field has a partner, and there's nothing fit for me. And so God caused him to fall asleep, took a rib, and made a woman. And he was like, wow, like at last this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, And what do you think, as a woman, is one of the most important things that can be taken from these verses?
I would probably have to say that back then, it's saying that they were naked and they were not ashamed. It's basically saying that you're able to expose yourself completely for who you are and not be ashamed. Not put yourself down for your looks or anything, because you know that in front of each other that you feel love, that you see each other with this just great admiration and this great love, and there should be no shame there. You should not feel ashamed there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like if there's one thing that the world is constantly trying to do, is it's trying to put shame in the God-ordained creation of the sexual intimacy of a man and a woman, and they're trying to put shame on that and say, no, that's not the only way people can express their love. They can express it from male to male, or from female to female, or they can express it in all different kinds of ways. And so the world wants to shame it. And so I think what you said is absolutely true. But there's a few points that I think both of us wanted to talk about as we go through this video together. And that when God created man and woman, He created them with a purpose. He created their bodies to be sexually compatible with one another.
Absolutely.
Men have their male anatomy, of course, and women have their female anatomy,
Yes.
and they're compatible. And it's a good thing when a man and a woman, they come together and they procreate. God commanded that they would be fruitful and multiply. And so because God commands it, since he is eternally and infinitely good, and because he is always commanding the righteous thing and the good thing, I mean, just think about it. Children are good things. Children are beautiful things. These are good things that come from God. They are amazing things. They're blessings, absolutely. And so when we procreate, we're actually entering into the commandment that God has given us as his creatures. Absolutely. And so it is good for men and for women to come together in sexual unity in the God-ordained creation of a man and a woman becoming one flesh and having children, right? Yeah. Another thing we wanted to say is that this notion of becoming one flesh, the world has just twisted it, right? Absolutely. Yeah, the world has just twisted it, and it's made a mockery of the female body and a mockery of the male body. And I know not everybody's gonna have like the fittest body that they could ever have. No. Not everybody's gonna have a six-pack with like bulging biceps, right? No. And so it seems like if you don't have that ideal body, then sex is kind of weird and it's kind of not intimate, or it doesn't get to be as intimate and as pleasurable as it can be if you have this and like this amazing image. If you don't have this amazing image, then somehow it hinders your sexuality at some point. But becoming one flesh, it's supposed to be an enjoyable thing, because that is how we are supposed to express our love for one another. Just like you said earlier, express our love for one another in the most maximized way that we can, right? Yes. What do you think?
It just goes back to the same thing. I mean, if we don't uphold this certain image, as you know, you're explaining it as a male, I can explain it as a woman. You know, if we don't have this certain image, you know, even after bearing kids, that we feel ashamed of ourselves. We turn off the lights and, you know, we try to just get it done just because we don't feel like, I don't know how to explain it. We don't feel like we're good enough anymore. We don't feel like we're loved, not because they're not showing love, but because we see ourselves and we see this image that we have to hold up to. And it's just unrealistic. Yeah. It's unrealistic, so.
I mean, when God created us, he created us knowing full well that our bodies were going to change, you know? Yeah. But he didn't create us so that if our bodies changed, then our sexual behaviors and our sexual pleasures would change. No, if anything, he created us so that we could continue in enjoying one another in that capacity. And so, when it comes to the created things of God, I think we can both agree that God created us to enjoy one another in sexual unity, and that's a good thing. It's meant for a male and a female, two individuals who have come together in marriage to enjoy sexual unity, to enjoy their bodies together, because God created our bodies to be good. They're not intended to be evil. They're not, just because we're in a fallen human state now and we're waiting for our bodies to be glorified doesn't mean that our bodies are disgusting or anything like that, right? No, if anything, we're supposed to enjoy our bodies, enjoy one another's bodies, and learn to appreciate one another's bodies, no matter what the size or form or shape of it is. And so when God created, he wanted all of that. I remember Matt Chandler, he was preaching, and he was like, when God created man and woman, and then after he made them, and then he turned around and he went to go make a sandwich, and when he came back, he was like, no, get off of her, that's not what I made that for. You know, and so the assumption is Adam never had sex with his wife until after the fall. Because the Bible never explicitly says that Adam knew his wife until after the fall, and that's when they started to bear children. So what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say that sexual intimacy is a result of the fall? No, I don't think so. I'm sure they were having plenty of sex before the fall.
Not only that, but why would he make that and not expect them to use it, you know? Yeah. to be blessed by it. It was there for a reason. God made it for a reason, and God is not mistaken when he does things.
Right, and I think it's such a beautiful thing when the scripture says that they were naked and they were not ashamed. See, the problem after the fall was not that they were like, hey, you're naked. No, they knew they were naked. They knew that they were naked together. The thing is, their thoughts about each other were so pure and so undefiled and so untwisted and so uncorrupt that they could be naked with one another and not have any evil thoughts of one another. And then when the fall happened, then they saw each other and all of their thoughts towards one another was twisted and corrupt, and they finally realized just how wicked they could be to one another. So that fear of having those thoughts and those emotions and that ability to cause harm and evil in a sexual manner to their loved one caused them to want to hide themselves so they wouldn't have to think that way. At least the Bible doesn't say that, but that's what I think theologically could have been the reason why they covered themselves. So with that, keeping that in mind, keeping the fall in mind, right? We know that the fall has caused sin to enter into our hearts and into our minds. And so when it comes to sex, a lot of the times the world and us as humans have corrupted our sexual pleasures, have used it for the wrong purposes. And so here's just a few things that we wanted to talk about that I think are good, that should not be practiced in the marriage bed. Hebrews chapter 13 verse 4. If you want to read Hebrews 13?
It says, marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexual immoral.
So the context is saying God will judge the adulterer and the sexually immoral, right?
Yes.
But we can say that to enter into a sexual unity with a prostitute or to engage in any kind of sexual immorality defiles the marriage bed, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So there's just a few points that we want to talk about that kind of tie up together and kind of apply it to other things, especially today. In our culture, sexuality is hyperactive. It's heightened to its maximum, and so a lot of the times, sex is used in the wrong way, right? Especially amongst married couples or with boyfriends and girlfriends, with engaged people. And one of the things we wanted to talk about was pornography. I don't know if you had any thoughts about pornography, but
I just think that it's such a dangerous thing to partake in, just because going back to those images that I said that we have to live up to, it not only shames us and makes us think wrongfully of our own selves, but it puts images in the head of men and makes them think like, yes, these women are being pleased in this way, or they look this way. Yeah. Why don't you look this way? Why don't you act this way? Yeah. You know, so it just messes with the whole relationship because it puts these expectations that should not be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then going back to this idea of keeping the marriage bed pure. I mean, because some people say they want to use pornography to try to spice up their love life or their sex life. And so they feel like watching pornography will activate something in them or enhance the whole act in their bed, and
the whole experience.
Yeah, the whole experience. And so they say, well, we try to use pornography to learn or to try to spice it up a little bit or get a little bit more worked up. And the sad part is that they're actually, even though it's on the TV or it's on the computer, they're actually allowing these people to enter into their marriage bed. They're actually allowing these strangers that they'll never meet in person, that they don't even know their real name, they're just allowing these people to infiltrate their sex life.
Yep.
And
so it's now not just them two, but 3-4 other people that are coming in as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. And what you said too about how it creates this narrative about sex, how men start to see these other women as like this unattainable figure and unattainable reality, that they say, well, hey, honey, how come you don't look like that? Or how come you don't do these things? Or how come you're not willing to go that far? You know, and so what happens in the minds of men, and I'm talking to you men especially, is that we tend to, especially when we watch pornography, because, I mean, I used to watch pornography. I used to watch it, and it used to alter my mind and the way I used to look at women. And so if we're allowing pornography to infiltrate our marriage bed, we're going to start looking at our wives as objects. And we're going to start fantasizing about the women in the video instead of just enjoying the moment and experiencing the ecstasy of engaging with your wife in sexual unity. And so pornography causes you to objectify your wife. She just becomes another object of your sexual fantasy. She no longer is the woman whom you love, whom you cherish, whom you see as beautiful or as precious anymore. Instead, she's just a sexual object in your sexual fantasies.
And not only that, that can also be vice versa. You know, women can also look at their husbands and be like, you know, why aren't you pleasing me like that guy is pleasing that girl? Or, you know, it's just, it should not be in the marriage bed. Yeah. It should not.
Yeah. Yeah, another thing I think is important or wise to stay away from is this whole sadomasochism, this domination, inflicting pain and bondage on to one another. You stay away from those things, because what the whole idea of this is that you try to take away the power of the other person. So again, it's this idea of objectifying the other person. They just become an object of your sexual pleasures. It's not about the person. It's not about engaging intimately together in sexual unity. And I think it's actually kind of dangerous.
Yeah.
Another point that we wanted to talk about was, especially when you start exploring one another, especially you younger married couples, 1-2 years. We've been married for 6.5 years, so it's not like we've had a lot of marriage, but we've actually, because of the word and because of older men and women in our life that have been able to engage in us and been able to counsel us and be able to mentor us and disciple us, we've actually been able to mature very quickly in our relationship and in our marriage, and we're very blessed because of that. But one thing that we always need to keep in mind as young men and women is we need to be conscious of each other's limits.
Yes.
And be conscious of each other's comfort zones, and realize that we're not always going to want to explore one another sexually to the max. You know, sometimes, and it's usually women that want to, you know, refrain from doing certain things because they're just not comfortable enough yet to engage in anything really too extravagant, if you want to use that word.
Yeah. And I would say that doesn't mean that it will never happen. I mean, it might not. You never know. But it's good to know that they have a limit, and if you respect that, maybe someday they will be willing to go that far. And if not, God will always use different ways for you guys to enjoy yourselves. So just enjoy what you have and try to explore, and if it doesn't go in one direction, it will go in another one, and you will be blessed no matter what.
Yeah, exactly. So. That's exactly right. And I think as men, we just need to be careful, and we need to be very, very gentle with our wives, and we need to be very conscious of her limits and her comfort zone. If she says, you know, I don't want to do that, or I don't feel comfortable doing that, don't try to force her to do those things. And so I think those are very wise words. And the last one, I think we want to talk about what you shouldn't do in your sex life is, I think it's so important, and this is for you men, especially for you men, refrain from going into explicit details, or really try to refrain from any details about the sexual nature of your sexual relations with your spouse. I was in high school, I was in football, and then I was in the Army for 5 years. And so I know what it looks like, and I know what goes on in conversation when a bunch of men come together. All they want to talk about is their drinking and their drugs and their sexual conquests. It's all they want to talk about, especially their sexual conquests. And they want to talk about women in a certain aspect, and they say, oh, this happened, and we did this, and this is what ended up happening, and she did this, and I did this to her. And so now you can't even look at that girl the same way anymore, because every single detail of her body and of what she did and of what she said and how she reacted and of everything has now been exploited. And it's so, so important that you men try to stay away from that as much as possible, because you want to try to keep your wife in a specific light in the eyes of the rest of the world. You do not want anybody ever to look at your wife or feel certain things about your wife that you yourself experience intimately in the marriage bed.
I think that goes along with, making sure that our marriage bed is undefiled. Yeah. Those are intimate things between you and your husband or you and your wife that you don't need other people to know. That's just between you and your spouse, and that's it. It's like you said, you don't need any other person walking around looking at your spouse the way you do at night by yourselves.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think those 4 things are good. So I'm sure we can get into a lot more, but I think though if you are able to exercise self-control in these 4 areas, don't watch pornography. That's just going to defile the marriage bed. You're allowing strangers, even if they're in a virtual reality, you're allowing those strangers to enter into that intimate relationship. Stay away from sadomasochism and bondage and inflicting pain on one another. That's just so dangerous. It's so dangerous, and it just makes the other person an object of your sexual fantasies. And be conscious of one another's limits and comfort zones, and explore one another if you're comfortable in doing that. But as soon as they get uncomfortable, just stop. Stop. It'd be better if you just stop. And lastly, like we just said, refrain from going into explicit details about your sexual intimacy with your partner. So putting the bad things aside, I think it's better that we start talking about the good things of sex. So what we really want to emphasize is enjoy your sexual pleasures with your spouse. Enjoy those things, because it's so important that as married couples that we know that it's not wrong to enjoy each other in a sexual way. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what God made it for. I mean, He said, go out and, multiply and, love one another. And that's just that kids come with loving one another and showing that love towards one another. And it's just so beautiful knowing that God blesses that unity. That is the ultimate type of unity there is in this world. Yeah. That you're joined with them and you're actually become one with them. And it's just amazing to know that God does bless that.
Yeah, and he absolutely does. And it's actually, sexual purity is so important for God. It's mentioned all throughout the Old Testament. It's mentioned all throughout the New Testament. How important it is that we keep our bodies pure from sexual immorality. Because it says here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, starting at verse 3, it says, "For this is the will of God, your sanctification." Now remember, sanctification is the process by which God is cleansing you from your sins and from your unrighteousness after you've been saved. So it says, "For this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each one of you know how to control his own body in holiness and in honor." Now, don't misunderstand the word holiness, because I think a lot of people, if you ask them, what's holiness? They say, well, it's sinlessness, or it's righteousness, it's doing good. But holiness is actually what means to set apart. It actually means to put aside for the workings of God, to make holy. It's not just to be sinless, but it means to be separate from the things of evil, to be unique and one of a kind. And so when the New Testament says in 1 Thessalonians that we are to know how to control our own body in holiness, what he's saying is, put your bodies aside and keep it pure. Why is that? Why do you think it would be so important that we do something like that, Princess?
It's the way just God operates, I believe. I mean, that's something that is spiritual, I think. And God is just telling us, this is a spiritual thing. It's not just physical, it's spiritual. So I need you to set yourself apart.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, when we set our bodies apart, we're basically saying we're going to wait for that one specific person that God designed our bodies to become one with.
Yes.
And so when we actually break that sexual purity and we are entering into sexual unity with somebody who is not going to be our wife, or even when they're not our wife, we're actually committing adultery on our future wives, if we ever do get married. For you who actually are going to get married, you're actually committing adultery against the person that God has sovereignly and purposefully chosen and created to satisfy your sexual pleasures. And it goes on to say, of course, that in verse 5, not in the passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God, that no one transgress and wrong his brother in this matter, because the Lord is an avenger of all these things, as we told you beforehand and solemnly warned you. So it's very important that we engage in sexual purity, that we wait for our spouse to be able to engage in sexual unity and to enjoy sex with one another, because God designed our wives and for our husbands, for you women, to be able to enjoy one another in that way. And I messed up. When I was younger, I didn't wait, and now I regret it. I regret not being patient and not staying pure, because I feel like it destroyed my ability to enjoy my first time with my spouse. And my wife, on the other hand, who is an amazing God-fearer, has actually waited for our marriage date, and for her to finally lose her virginity. And I think that's such an amazing testimony to the grace of God in her life. And I don't know if you're willing, but why is it so important that girls wait for their husbands?
Because they get emotionally attached. It's this amazing experience, and it's something that you want to share with your husband. You know that they're going to completely love you back, that they're willing to commit to you, that they want to have kids with you, they want to be there in the long run. And it's something that God has blessed. God has said, this is the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with. Go ahead and enjoy each other. But on the other hand, when you don't wait, you risk finding somebody that is just there to hurt you, there to use you, there to objectify you. Sometimes you get pregnant and they just up and leave. So it's just better to wait. It is much better to wait and know that those emotions that you feel, that love that you feel, is being reciprocated.
Yeah, that's a absolutely wonderful thing to say. And I would say the same thing even to men. Even to men. We try to play it off like we don't care. But I know that some men, at least most men, who aren't already polluted with pornography, with so much pornography, that most men also get emotionally attached to the girls that they first have sex with. And it's heartbreaking when they lose that person or they lose that girl, because that was me. Even at a young age, I really didn't watch a lot of pornography, and so I was still able to retain some kind of sexual purity. But even then, damage is already done. But that's what happens when you're not saved by the grace of God. You just do things against the nature of the created order of God, and you mess up. Well, one of the good things that one of the things I wanted to say is actually a good thing, and it's not even spoken about very very much, especially among Christian families, especially here in America, is the one way we can fight in ensuring that our young men and women retain their sexual purity is getting married young. Yes. And I know you agree with that, right?
Yes.
And I know I agree with that, and I know a lot of people listening are not agreeing with that right now.
We're saying for the most part. Not absolutely everybody has to get married young, but for the most part it would be good for young people to get married.
Right. And the reason why we say that is because Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, he says in verse 2, "But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband." And so part of the problem, and I'm not blaming the culture entirely, because I think it's also just sin nature, right? But part of the problem is that culture dictates when a man and a woman are considered men and women. And so we say at this age, that's when they become men and women who are able to make their own decisions. And usually that's 18. 18 is usually when society has dictated that you're now old enough to get married, to start your own life, to get a credit card and a house, etc., etc. But the problem is that usually guys and girls hit their sexual primes at age 15 or 16, and so they're already experiencing this heightened sexual desires 3, maybe 4 years before they're even eligible, or before society says that they're now old enough to get married. And I'm not saying, this is not what I'm saying, okay? I'm not saying that kids should get married at age 15. That's not what I'm saying.
Absolutely
but
not.
What I am saying is that as parents, we have 3 kids of our own. We're nowhere near the teenage years yet, but we're talking to adults that already have children in teenage years, and it's so important that we start instilling in our child the fear of God.
Absolutely.
That we start instilling in our child the message of the gospel of grace, the message of salvation of Jesus Christ to them, so that when the Holy Spirit finally causes them to be born again in the Holy Spirit, that they actually have the wisdom of God and the Spirit of God guiding them. Now, I know that doesn't mean that they're not going to make mistakes. They're going to make mistakes, and as parents we need to be ready to offer grace and mercy, but also wisdom and punishment if necessary when our children start to make those mistakes, and not just say, well, it's just boys being boys, or it's just girls exploring their bodies. I think that's it's just a cop-out. It's just parents not taking responsibility, and it's parents not taking charge of their children. Because I think that it's important that we start preparing, especially us men, preparing our sons to marry their future wives. What does it mean to be a hard worker? What does it mean to provide? What does it mean to serve our wives? What does it mean to love gently and tenderly our wives? What does it mean to care for our wives and be willing to protect our wives no matter the cost? And I know that as men, most of the times we're failing at that. There's a reason why 50% or more of black children are growing up without a father. There's a reason why 35% or more of Hispanic children are growing up without a father. And that's a real issue, because it's actually adding to the numbers. It's actually multiplying the numbers and the problems of teenage pregnancy and abortion in teenage pregnancies, because the father is not engaged. And honestly, it's going to rely mostly on the fathers to not only train their sons, but also teach their daughters what kind of man they ought to look for. And the best way a man can do that is to actually love their mother, love his wife gently and passionately, the way that they would want a man to love his daughter.
Yeah.
What do you think, or what would you say to mothers out there who are experiencing maybe some of this difficulty with their children or with their daughters?
I would say that as believers, we not only have to instill the message of the gospel and, teach them these things about God and the fear of God, but we also need to talk to them about purity and not just say you need to wait. I would say you need to sit down and you need to have this conversation and tell them you don't need to wait just because it's a sin, but God mandated this for a reason, and explain to them the reasons that they can get emotionally attached, they can have a baby out of wedlock. And not only that, but it'll create, if this person leaves and doesn't marry them, it'll create this feeling of being unworthy, being unloved, and it'll start a cycle of them doing this over and over and over again, and that's not what you want. You want your daughters and your sons to know that it is a sin, but they need to wait, and the reasons why they need to wait. A lot of the times parents are afraid to mention why it is not okay to engage in these things. They just say it's a sin, and I said no, so you need to not even. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be something that kids are able to come and speak to their parents and say, I'm having issues with this. Because at that age, at 15, 16 years old, yes, they're very hormonal, but they are not mature, so they don't know these things. And that's why it's good for them to come and speak to the parents, and you be able to be open with them, and especially if you've gone through those issues, and say, don't do these things. Don't make the same mistakes that I did, instead of saying I'm a Christian and that's a sin, and no, just don't. Yeah,
that's wonderfully said, and I absolutely agree with that. I think the tendency a lot of the times for parents is to say, if you have sex before marriage, you're gonna feel horrible inside. You're gonna just gonna feel torn apart. You're gonna feel terrible. And then if they do, they're like, actually, I feel great. This feels wonderful because God meant it for it to be wonderful, And so a lot of the times, just our words saying, "Because I said so," and you're gonna feel horrible. Sometimes it's not. It's not gonna fly with our teenagers. Sometimes it will. Very, very rarely, but sometimes it will.
And not only that, but they put shame on it. They say sex is disgusting when that is not the case. It's not something that is disgusting. It's just something that should only be shared in the marital bed.
Absolutely. And going on with this theme of disgusting, actually the Bible talks about how we are to enjoy one another. And so I think one of the good things about sex is we can have a lot of it. We are actually designed to have a lot of sex, and that's actually a good thing for our bodies. It's actually a good thing for our minds and for our physical state. Sometimes we can be filled with anxiety or stress about something, and so we engage in sexual unity, and then all of a sudden you're coming out the other side like, I feel actually better. So it's actually, God designed it to be not only something for bodily pleasure, but for emotional relief, for stress relief, for anxiety relief, for so many types of relief, because that's what God designed it for. And the problem is that the world has so twisted it and has so corrupted it that now it's not so wonderful anymore. Now it's just about getting aggressive and about getting as dirty as possible, and so
as many as possible,
as many partners as possible, or even going to the point of like, well, if you're not satisfied with women, why don't you try men? Or if you're a woman, why don't you try women? And so it's not so much about the wonderful gift of sex, but about exploiting this gift that God has given us and using it for corrupted purposes. So one of the wonderful things about being married and about engaging in sexual unity is that we can have a lot of sex. And it's wonderful, and it's actually a good thing. And the Bible talks about how we are supposed to enjoy one another. And this is what Proverbs chapter 5, starting at verse starting at verse, oh man, I lost my spot. Let me see here. Proverbs 5, starting at verse 18. It says, "Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth." See, so again, there's another example of why I think it's important that men and women get married young. And don't believe the lies. If you get married young, it's not going to hinder you from going to school. You can still go to school. You can still have a job. You can still have a career. You just got to be more careful, because you're going to be having sex, so you can get pregnant, and that can alter your plans. But if you do get pregnant, just realize that that's God's hand in the midst of it. He designed for you to have that child when it does come. And don't say, "Man, I did not plan for this," and then you go have an abortion. That's worse. Yeah. That would be the most horrible thing that you could ever do. If anything, just live as you are called. Again, we're not saying that every college student out there should be married, but I think it's just downplayed way too much in our culture to say, no, first you need to get your schooling done, which is about 4 years for your bachelor's, or 8 years for a master's. Then you got to get established in your career, which is about another 3 to 4 years maybe. And so by the time you know it, you're already 32 and you're not married, and you've already engaged in sexual immorality with all these partners, because guess what? Sexual immorality is crouching at the door all the time. So I got married to her when I was 20. She was 19. And honestly, we probably would have gotten married younger had it not been for my Army training and for all my schooling in the Army. We probably would have gotten married sooner, just because we just felt like it was we were both ready. Maybe we weren't the most mature, but I know she was way more mature than me. And I had a job, and I knew what it meant to be a hard worker, thanks to my dad's example and the way he taught me, and instilling the fear of the Lord. Even though I wasn't a believer, I still had these foundational beliefs on what it meant to be a father and a husband and a provider and a protector. So let's continue on. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. A lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breast fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. It doesn't just say sometimes, but be intoxicated. Like, experience the euphoria of being able to engage with one another in sexual unity. Like, just enjoy it. Just relish in it. How important is it, do you think, for girls to get married at a young age? Let's say they want to go to college, right? Let's say they want a career. Can they still do these things even though they're married?
Absolutely, they do. I mean, it's just like you were saying, if they don't want to have kids and they want to pursue a career before starting a complete family, then you can always do that. You can always just be careful and, try and postpone. Like he said, if God wants you to have a child, you will have one. But for the most part, I mean, you're able to control those things. It's not wrong for you to say, I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. I want to experience their love completely. Because, I mean, there's going to be times where it's going to be difficult for you to abstain from having any sexual intercourse or any contact of that nature. So it's just better for you to get married and experience everything together.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. And again, this notion of engaging in sexual unity as much as possible, whenever you want to, it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, it says in verse 3, "The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband." So, in other words, what he says, and he goes on to say, "For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does." Now, conjugal rights. What does it mean to have conjugal rights? And the definition of the word conjugal means of or relating to marriage or the relationship of a married couple. So everything that goes with being married, it's not just about sex, although sex is an important aspect of your conjugal rights. My body does not belong to myself. So if my wife has desires and I'm just like tired and I'm like, no, babe, not tonight. Well, I think it's important that you come together and pray, and that the person who is willing to lay down his body for the sake of his wife, to say, okay, let's engage in this, because my body is not my own and I'm here for you. The world wants to say completely differently. The world wants to say, no, your body is yourself. So therefore, when you feel like having sex, whenever you feel like having sex, however you feel like having sex, do it that way. Because that's what you're feeling. When the Bible is the complete opposite. It's saying, no, if you don't feel like having sex, but your wife is desiring you, be selfless. Give her her conjugal rights. Lay down your body for her and do what you gotta do. Basically.
It could also be vice versa, though. There are times where one wants to and the other one is too tired. And there's nothing wrong for you to say, you know what, my husband or my wife is too tired tonight. We can always wait till tomorrow. You know, that is also laying down your body for your husband or for your wife.
Yeah, and we tend to associate making love or having sex with somebody just like in the action itself, like when it's nighttime already and you're in bed, and then that's when you finally engage in your sexual unity. But it's so important as men that we make love to our wives all day. Like, it's not just when we get in bed and we're like, okay, now I'm ready, but rather do everything possible to serve your wife, to tell her that you're proud of the work that she does throughout the day, that you appreciate everything that she does, that she's a wonderful mother and a wonderful wife, and that everything she does you appreciate. And if all day you're making love to her, basically by making love to her mind, because what you're doing is you're actually making her feel like she's loved throughout the whole day. And so by the time night comes around, she's not going to just feel like she's this worthless mother who's just not getting anything done right, and that the children are just always in chaos, and that you're always frustrated at her. So she's not going to feel like she wants to engage in sexual unity at night. So what about women?
Yeah. In that case, I would say that she, at that point, would probably feel used all day. Used in the kitchen, used in the cleaning, used in taking care of the kids, and then she comes to bed ready to rest, and she's going to feel used even more. So it's like you said, make love to her all day. The same thing with men, let them know that they're appreciated all throughout the day, whatever it is they do, whether they're home helping you or at work or at school, whatever it is they do. If they come home and they do something for you, take out the trash, let them know how appreciated they are. So that way when it comes time for you guys to come together, they're already ready to go. They're like, yes, I love you. You made me feel loved, and I just want to show you how much I love you back.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong actually with being sexy, with trying to be sexy for one another. I mean, as men, I think we need to be spontaneous. Instead of like doing the same routine over and over again every single night, surprise her one day, set up a babysitter, get the movie tickets ready, get the money together so that you can take her out to eat. Just be super spontaneous, and she'll love that. She'll absolutely love that. Try to understand what her love language is. What does she like? I mean, there was the 5 love languages, right? There's the gifts, right? The language of gifts, service, time, and then there's I should have wrote these down.
There's touch.
And
then we probably should.
Yeah, we should have wrote them down. Anyways, then there's this other 5th one, I guess, that everybody forgets. But for example, like her love language is time and service, and so I like touch. Like I love it when I feel loved when she actually like holds me and hugs me and kisses me. I love that. That's when I feel loved. But it's not good enough for me to express to her my love language. I have to learn hers, and try to make her feel loved in that way throughout the day. So I'm always trying to wash the dishes, or I'm cooking, or I'm changing diapers, or I'm taking care of the kids, or I'm spanking the kids, I'm disciplining the kids for her. Because you don't understand, men, how important it is for us men to help her with that, because a lot of the times the authority of the man helps them to be able to not have to worry about having to constantly not only take care but discipline the children. So I'm trying to do these things all day because I know that that's what she wants from me. Yeah. And so I think it's so important that that making love to each other is not just in the bed, but it's all throughout the day, and that there's nothing wrong with being sexy for one another. Be spontaneous. Paul Washer said this. He said if that there was an old farmer, and he's using the barn as a metaphor to his wife, and he said, if the barn needs painting, paint it. Basically saying like, hey women, like if you need some makeup, like go ahead and put some makeup on. But he used like the illustration of a barn.
Yes, as women, there are things that we can do to make love to our husbands. I believe the 5th love language is words of affirmation.
Oh,
and
that's right.
You know, there are so many things that we as women can do to make love to our husbands throughout the day. We can give them words of affirmation, let them know how hardworking they are. We can have a nice cooked meal when they get home, or we can have the house cooked. We can get our hair done, and we can put makeup on, like you said, paint our face. And there are other things we can do, like wearing lingerie, just to make ourselves look sexy, to make them feel loved. I mean, you don't have to do it all the time, but those times that you do them, they will feel loved. They will feel like you put that time in, that you thought about them, that it wasn't just about you, that you had them in mind, and you were wanting to make them feel loved.
Yeah, and I think we've actually covered pretty much all of it. We're starting to come up on an hour now of our conversation, and I think it's super, super helpful. But again, just to kind of reiterate, it's important that we start to teach our children to get ready for the reality of marriage, because most likely almost all of our children will be married someday. And so we need to start helping them to realize and understand what is expected of them in marriage. You know, the role of a man, the role of a woman, and them coming together and fulfilling those roles just as God has designed, as compatible to one another. Teaching young men not to lord their position over their wives, and teaching women not to try to dominate their husbands, but rather trying to submit to one another and engaging with one another and partnering with one another, because that's what God designed Eve for, was to be Adam's partner. You know, so it's important to get married young. Not everybody's going to get married young. Some people are going to say, I want to get my career, my school, and everything else done before that, and that's fine. But if you're not doing anything with your life, either join the army or get married. Like do something that's actually going to help you to instill some responsibility, and that's actually going to be good for your sanctification. I think Matt Chandler said that marriage is the greatest sanctifier, because it teaches you all your shortcomings. You can be in college and you can say, man, I got this all down. I'm a servant, I'm really patient with my friends, and then all of a sudden you're married and you're like the most impatient and selfish person. So marriage is one of the greatest sanctifiers, and I think that's absolutely true. So get married young. It's not wrong to engage in sex and to have a lot of it. Do it. It's great. It's meant for being a blessing. It's meant to actually help our minds and to help our hearts and to help our bodies to be relaxed and to be
healthy all around.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong about being sexy for one another. In reality, sex is actually meant for Christians. The world has just twisted it, has corrupted it, and it makes sex a gross thing, and it wants to say that sex is just exploiting each other's bodies. But in reality, sex was actually made for the believer, because we know how to engage in sexual activity without taking it to its extreme, without corrupting it, without twisting it, and without making it a thing that is undesirable. Sex is not gross. Sex is amazing. It is meant to be amazing. God designed our bodies to engage with one another so that it would be an amazing experience. Sex is supposed to be euphoric, pleasurable, and exciting. Be spontaneous, learn each other's love languages, make love to each other all day, make love to each other's minds and to each other's emotions and to each other's hearts. Do it all day, and don't let the enemy or the world rob you of that joy.
Absolutely.
The enemy is always going to try to corrupt the design of God in the marriage place. So, before we close out, Princess, any last words before we finish?
No. Just if you have any questions, leave them down below.
Yeah, subscribe below. Right there, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Right? I think it's right there. But anyways, hit that subscribe button. I would love to hear your feedback. I would appreciate it if you left us comments, any questions, or if you want us to talk about another topic as husband and wife. I really enjoy doing this. This is our first time doing this together, and I really, really enjoyed it. So, God bless you guys. Thank you for listening. May the Lord richly bless you and keep you in His loving embrace always.
Amen.